Hello, and thank you for watching D&D Book Club, hosted by myself, Megan J. This episode is a deep dive into the Dragonlance novel Dragons of Winter Night by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, which I first recorded as a podcast episode in 2020. It begins, like every episode of D&D Book Club, with a rhetorical introduction and a brief excerpt from the novel before diving into the world of Dragonlance. The quality is a little shaky in the early episodes, but it does improve in later episodes. If you're interested in listening to any of my podcast projects or watching my live stream on Twitch, please check out the links in the show notes. There will also be a link to my page on the DMs Guild if you want to check out my original content, as well as a link to my Patreon page where you can hear bonus episodes of my show. Thank you again, and enjoy. What does a promise mean to you? Do you keep every promise you make, or just the big ones? We all like to imagine we're trustworthy and honest, but being trustworthy and honest can be difficult, even dangerous. Would you be willing to risk everything to keep a promise you've made, even if it's a promise you've made only in your own heart? The Banishment. As with so many other cities in Krynn, with its pride grew its conceit. Tarsus began seeking more and more from the gods: wealth, power, glory. The people worshipped the king priest of Istar, who, seeing suffering in the land, demanded of the gods in his arrogance what they had granted Huma in humility. Even the knights of Selamnia, bound by the strict laws of the measure, encased in religion that had become all ritual with little depth, fell under the sway of the mighty king priest. Then came the cataclysm, a night of terror, when it rained fire. The ground heaved and cracked as the gods in their righteous anger hurled a mountain of rock down upon Krynn, punishing the king priest of Istar and the people for their pride. The people turned to the knights of Selamnia. "You who are righteous, help us," they cried. "Placate the gods." But the knights could do nothing. The fire fell from the heavens and the land split asunder. The sea waters fled, the ships foundered and toppled, the wall of the city crumbled. When the night of horror ended, Tarsus was landlocked. The white-winged ships lay upon the sand like wounded birds. Dazed and bleeding, the survivors tried to rebuild their city, expecting any moment to see the knights of Selamnia come marching from their great fortresses in the north, marching from Palanthus, Salanthus, Vingard Keep, Thalgard, marching south to Tarsus to help them and protect them once more. But the knights did not come. They had their own troubles and could not leave Selamnia. Even if they had been able to march, a new sea split the land of Abyssinia. The dwarves in their mountain kingdom of Thorbardin shut their gates, refusing admittance to anyone, and so the mountain passes were blocked. The elves withdrew into Qualinesti, nursing their wounds, blaming humans for the catastrophe. Soon, Tarsus lost all contact with the world to the north. And so, following the cataclysm, when it became apparent that the city had been abandoned by the knights, came the day of banishment. The lord of the city was placed in an awkward position. He did not truly believe in the corruption of the knights, but he knew the people needed something or someone to blame. If he sided with the knights, he would lose control of the city, and so he was forced to close his eyes to angry mobs that attacked the few remaining knights in Tarsus. They were driven from the city or murdered. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of the D&D Book Club. My name is Megan, and today we'll be exploring the second novel of the Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy, Dragons of Winter Night, written by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman and published in 1985 by TSR Incorporated. Before we begin, I want to warn you that this episode will contain spoilers, so you may want to read the novel for yourself first before listening to this episode. The next book we'll be reading is the third novel in the trilogy, Dragons of Spring Dawning, so you'll have 2 weeks from the day this episode is uploaded to catch up if you're interested. I'm going to start this episode with another examination of the mythology of the Dragonlance series. Krynn is ruled over by a pantheon of 21 gods, 7 gods of good, 7 gods of evil, and 7 gods of neutrality, acting as a balance between the light and the darkness. Chief among the gods of good is Paladine, sometimes called the Valiant Warrior or the Platinum Dragon, a deity dedicated to protecting the world against the forces of evil. His consort is Mishakal, the goddess of healing, to whom one of our heroes, Goldmoon, is a devoted priestess. There are other gods of good, but they aren't very important, with the possible exception of the god of white magic, Solanari. The gods of good created the Elves, a race of long-lived and unchanging beings hoping to bring order to a chaotic world. The gods of evil are ruled by the Queen of Darkness, Tikhisis, sometimes called the Dark Queen, the Dark Warrior, the Dark Temptress, and the Five-Headed Dragon. Tikhisis is, to put it simply, the big bad of the entire Dragonlance saga. She is a total boss bitch, and her only goal is complete world domination. Tikhisis is, as far as I know, the only female supreme evil in fantasy, although feel free to email me if I'm wrong. The gods of evil, as you might suspect, are the coolest pantheon in Dragonlance. There's the Queen's consort, Sarganis, god of fire, Chemosh, god of the undead, Morgion, god of disease, Zeboim, goddess of the sea, Hidukal, god of thieves and bankers, and the god of black magic, Nuitari. The evil gods created the race of ogres, which were initially the most beautiful and intelligent of all the races, until their evil ways caused them to devolve into the big stupid brutes we all know today. The foremost of the gods of neutrality is the god Gillian, whose symbol is a book or scales of balance. He is neutral in all things and takes no sides. His only desire is to maintain the balance between good and evil. Also within the neutral pantheon is the god of smithcraft, Reorx. It's said that Reorx forged the world himself with his hammer and anvil. He's the patron deity of the dwarves and gnomes, two races who highly value craftsmanship, although their definitions of craftsmanship vary considerably. One of my favorite goddesses of the series is Lunatari, the goddess of neutral magic. It is said that she sprang into existence one day, fully formed from Gillian's thoughts. The gods of neutrality created the race of humans, wanting a race who would not be predisposed to good or to evil, but would have free will to choose. For this reason, the gods of neutrality also gave humans the shortest lifespan of all the races. Thanks for that, gods of neutrality. Okay, so that's your history lesson for today. Now, before we move on to Dragons of Winter Night, let's do a brief recap of the previous novel, Dragons of Autumn Twilight. If you haven't listened already, I suggest you check out episode 1 of the D&D book club before continuing. In Dragons of Autumn Twilight, we meet a group of adventurers known as the Companions, a mismatched group of unlikely heroes. After 5 years apart, they reunite and embark on a quest to find proof of the existence of the Forgotten Gods and to defeat the evil dragon High Lord, Verminard. With a little help from these ancient gods, the Companions defeat Verminard and his red dragon, Ember. They free hundreds of slaves from the mines beneath the ancient fortress of Pax Tharkis and lead them to safety. The Companions are victorious for now, but the war against the dragons is far from over. So grab a mug of mulled wine and your favorite woolly mammoth blanket and get comfortable, because this is going to be a long, cold night. As the novel opens, the Companions have taken the slaves turned refugees into the underground kingdom of Thorbarden, home of the Mountain Dwarves. The Mountain Dwarves have agreed to provide shelter to the human refugees for the winter as payment for the Companions recovering the legendary Hammer of Karis. This hammer, it is said, can be used to forge the Dragonlance. Unfortunately, nobody knows how to forge a Dragonlance, even with the hammer. The situation is only temporary, unfortunately. The dwarves can't house the humans indefinitely, and the humans can't tolerate living underground much longer anyway. Already a faction of humans, led by our old friend Hedrick the Theocrat, is grumbling about their circumstances. A permanent solution is needed. Tasselhoff Burfoot, the group's amateur cartographer, finds a port city called Tarsus the Beautiful on one of his maps. The Companions decide to travel to Tarsus in the dead of winter, hoping to find the means to transport the refugees to the safety of a new home. Making the long, grueling trudge is the Companions' leader, Tanis Half-Elven, the somber knight Sternbrightblade, the elf princess Larana and her brother Gilthanas, the red-robed wizard Raceland Magir and his warrior twin, Caramon, the barbarians Goldmoon and Riverwind, the former barmaid Tika Whalen, the cleric Elistan, the dwarven metalsmith Flint Fireforge, and of course the fun-loving Kender Tasselhoff. The temperature may be low, but the relationship drama is running high as the Companions slog through the snow. Tanis is in love with Lorana, whom he dumped for the human mercenary Kitiara, whom he hasn't even seen in 5 years. Meanwhile, Gilthanas is suspicious of Tanis because he wants to keep his sister as far away from this illegitimate half-human as possible, which isn't hard since Lorana has been spending all of her time with Elistan and seems to have no interest in Tanis, who naturally becomes jealous. Ultimately, the journey is hardly worth all the frostbite. Tasselhoff's map is old, so old in fact that it shows a sea where no sea currently exists. Tarsus is landlocked and has been so ever since the Cataclysm shattered the continent of Ansalon more than 200 years ago. Tarsus has seen better days. After all, it's hard to maintain an economy based on maritime trade without, water. The group decides to rest at an inn for the night before planning their next move, but nothing is ever so simple for the companions. Elves and dwarves haven't been seen in Tarsus for a long time, and the group immediately attracts the wrong kind of attention. But worse yet is the presence of a knight of Selamnia, one Sternbrightblade. The people of Tarsus hate the Knights of Selamnia for failing to protect the city after the Cataclysm. This itself isn't so unusual. Lots of people hate the Knights for the same reason, but in Tarsus that hatred is especially acute. Tanis, Sturm, Tasselhoff, and Flint are arrested for no particular reason, and a riot nearly breaks out as they're being taken to the jail. The people see Sturm's Solamnic armor and start pelting him with all kinds of garbage. Tasselhoff manages to escape during the fray, and he encounters more Knights of Selamnia. These are led by the biggest prick on Ansalon, Derek Crowngard. It is Derek who will ultimately reveal to the group Sturm's shocking secret. Sturm is not a Knight of Selamnia. He was never accepted into the Order, despite his noble lineage. He has been living a lie all this time. Derek and the other knights have come to Tarsus seeking information from an ancient library. In the library, Tass uses a pair of magical glasses he quote-unquote borrowed from someone in Thorbarden and learns of a mysterious magical artifact called the Dragon Orb. The Dragon Orbs supposedly had the power to control dragons. This is good to know, since without any lances to stab the dragons, an orb to control them might be the next best thing. Upon arriving at the jail, the companions meet another beautiful elf princess. Her name is Alhana Starbreeze. She is the daughter of Lorak, the Speaker of the Stars, essentially the king of the race of elves called the Sylvanesti. She's also one of the most beautiful women on Ansalon, and Sternbrightblade is immediately smitten. Alhana can't resist Sturm's excellent manners, and she is soon smitten right back at him. Alhana gives Sturm a rare and precious token of eternal love called the Star Jewel. There's no time for these 90-minute fiancés to moon over each other, however. Tarsus is attacked by a new dragon High Lord, and the companions are separated in the confusion. Sturm, Lorana, Gilthanas, Elistan, Flint, and Tasselhoff manage to escape the city along with Sir Derek Crowngard. They proceed south to search for a dragon orb in the glacial region known as Icewall. Meanwhile, Tanis, Goldmoon, Riverwind, Raceland, Caramon, and Tika are trapped when the inn collapses on top of them. Only Raceland's magic saves them from being instantly killed. The companions are ultimately rescued from the ruins of the inn by none other than Alhana Starbreeze. She essentially kidnaps them and flies them on her griffins to the forest realm of Sylvanesti, far to the east. She needs warriors to help her find her father, who just so happens to have a dragon orb of his own. But there is something rotten in the state of Sylvanesti. The once beautiful land has been corrupted by evil magic into something out of a nightmare. Raceland warns them that this is, quite literally, a waking nightmare dreamed into reality by the Speaker of the Stars. Where the dream ends and reality begins may mean the difference between life and death. With no other choice but to press on, the companions proceed through the twisted and deformed forest, attacked by undead elven warriors and other monsters. But it's not only the companions who are physically present in Sylvanesti who find themselves battling to the Tower of the Stars. The companions currently on their way to Icewall have been pulled into the dream along with their friends. Even Kitiara finally makes her first appearance, although whether it's really her and not just a projection of Tanis's unconscious isn't entirely obvious. One by one, the companions die. Yes, you heard right, they all die, one after the next, until only Tanis, Lorana, Sturm, Kitiara, and a now black-robed Raceland remain. At the Tower of the Stars, they find a huge green dragon named Scion Bloodbane, and they find Lorak, the king of the Sylvanesti Elves. Lorak has been trapped by the power of the Dragon Orb, which he foolishly attempted to use to protect his land. The plan backfired horrifically. Scion Bloodbane has been whispering nightmares into the sleeping Lorak's ear, nightmares which the magic of the Dragon Orb have made real. Sturm, Laurana, and Kitiara are killed. Only Raistlin and Tanis remain. Raistlin turns the full force of his magic against the dragon. Tanis is overwhelmed by despair. He has lost everything and everyone he loves. Then, at the very last moment, Tanis finally comprehends that this truly is a dream and wakes. Tanis and all his companions are alive, but emotionally traumatized as they wake up within the Tower of the Stars. The dragon has been banished. Lorak is finally free from the control of the Dragon Orb. Raistlin, still in his usual red robes, takes possession of the Dragon Orb. He dares not use it, however, fearing that he may suffer the same fate as Lorak. Meanwhile, much farther south, Sturm, Laurana, and their companions awake from the shared dream as well, wondering what it all meant. Sturm, Laurana, and their companions eventually reach Icewall. They befriend another group of so-called barbarians, much like the Inuit of the Arctic, although technically it's the Antarctic since we're in the southern hemisphere. After battling some walrus men, they discover something incredibly strange, even stranger than walrus men. The dead body of an ancient knight of Selamnia, riding the dead body of a silver dragon, both frozen in ice. The dead knight is holding something in his hand, which Sturm is able to obtain. It is the haft of a broken Dragonlance. The companions take on a dark elf dragon high lord named Fialthas, defeat him, and claim the Icewall Dragon Orb. They set sail for the island kingdom of Urgoth to rejoin Laurana and Gilthanis' people, the Qualinesti Elves in exile. It is not smooth sailing. Their ship is pursued and sunk by an ice-breathing white dragon named Sleet. The group survives the encounter, however, washing up on shore in southern Urgoth. They are able to rejoin the Qualinesti Elves, who are currently on the brink of war with the Sylvanesti Elves, who are also living in exile on Urgoth. Both the Qualinesti Elves and the Sylvanesti Elves have enslaved the Kaganesti Elves, who live in the Urgothian wilderness. The first elves must have skipped class the day Paladine taught them not to enslave people. Laurana and Gilthanis try to convince their father to let them take the Dragon Orb to Sandcrest, the headquarters of the Knights of Selamnia, so it can be used in the war against the evil dragons. The Speaker of the Suns refuses, ordering that the Dragon Orb remain with the Qualinesti. He's also still pretty mad at Laurana for running away from home to chase after Tanis in the last novel, although he doesn't say it that way because he doesn't know he's in a novel. With the help of an unwashed Kaganesti elf named Silvara and the human blacksmith Theros Ironfeld, the companions escape and steal the Dragon Orb from the Qualinesti elves. Remember Theros? He had his arm involuntarily amputated by Draconians in Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and only survived because of Goldmoon's healing prayers. He has since obtained a magical silver arm to replace his old flesh and skin arm. This silver arm, according to legend, is needed to forge the Dragonlance. They travel by river for several days, pursued by Qualinesti. Gilthanis begins to realize he's in love with the perpetually dirty Silvara. He creepily watches her as she finally takes a bath, and is relieved to see that she is beautiful under all that mud. Silvara doesn't think Gilthanis spying on her while bathing is a red flag, so she admits she's in love with him as well. Eventually, the group is forced to split up. Sturm and Derek take the Dragon Orb to Sandcrest, while the remainder of the party lead the Qualinesti Elves on a merry chase in the wrong direction. The second group is led by the increasingly erratic Silvara to a hidden tomb. The tomb was built within an enormous statue of a dragon, which was carved from the side of a mountain. Silvara explains that this is the Tomb of Huma, the greatest of all the Knights of Selamnia. Many centuries ago, Huma gave his life to save the world from the Queen of Darkness. Laurana, knowing Silvara is acting sketchy, calls her out, and Silvara casts a spell on the group. Only Tasselhoff avoids the spell and manages to sneak away. He finds yet another chamber within the statue, this one a comfortable apartment inhabited by his old friend Fizban. Fizban, you'll recall, is the befuddled old wizard thought to have died in Pax Tharkis. Tass is thrilled to find him alive and tells Fizban about Silvara. Together, Tass and Fizban confront Silvara. Fizban undoes her spell, and Silvara confesses that she is not really an elf maiden at all. She is a silver dragon in disguise. Poor Gilthanas' heart is broken when he realizes his significant other is actually a giant reptile, an experience most women are all too familiar with. Sovara explains that the eggs of the good dragons have been stolen by the Queen of Darkness's minions. The eggs are being used as hostages to keep the good dragons out of the war. Sovara realizes she cannot stand by any longer. She directs the companions to a secret well of liquid silver within the heart of the mountain. Together, Theros and Flint use the magical silver to forge new Dragonlances. While all of these exciting adventures are happening, full of battles and chases and dragons and romance and surprise twist after surprise twist, Tanis and his companions aren't doing much of anything. They have managed to put together a kind of traveling roadshow featuring feats of strength and archery, Tika's dancing, and Raceland's illusions. In this way, the group is able to travel unbothered through the war-torn countryside while saving up enough money to book passage on a ship. Goldmoon begins to convert more and more people to the faith of the ancient true gods as they travel, and the religion begins to grow and spread. Caramon and Tika do a lot of cuddling and kissing, but don't go all the way, because Caramon can't stop thinking about his brother, and that's a big mood killer. Only one interesting thing happens during this entire sequence, when Raceland at last attempts to use the Dragon Orb, although he does this in secret. Raceland is a powerful magic user, but not nearly powerful or experienced enough to master a Dragon Orb. Still, his ambition and his lust for magical knowledge drive him onward. Raceland succeeds in taking control of the Dragon Orb, bending it to his will, but Raceland doesn't achieve this tremendous feat entirely on his own. He has assistance from an unseen presence, an unseen presence he encountered only once before on the precipice of death during his test in the Tower of High Sorcery years earlier. Who or what this mysterious presence is remains to be seen. Tasselhoff and Fizban travel together to the home of Lord Gunthar Uthwistan, the highest-ranking knight of Selamnia. Gunthar is up for election to Grand Master this year, with the opposing party led by the odious Sir Derek Crowngard. The Dragon Orb which Sturm and Derek brought to Sandcrest has been sent to the gnomes of Mount Nevermind for safekeeping and study until the knights can decide what to do with it. Fizban convinces Lord Gunthar to send him and Tasselhoff to retrieve it. Meanwhile, Sturm is put on trial, accused by Derek of cowardice and running from the enemy, i.e. the Qualinesti Elves, during their escape. Sturm is exonerated when he cleverly makes the case that, since the Qualinesti Elves are technically allies of the Knights, it can't be said that he was running from the enemy. Sturm is finally granted official knighthood after all these years. Tasselhoff and Fizban manage to survive their trip to Mount Nevermind, where they meet a gnome with an impossibly long name and are subject to all manner of dangerously unpredictable inventions, the most memorable being the catapult-like gnome flingers, which the gnomes of Mount Nevermind use instead of elevators. With the Dragon Orb in hand, they return to Sandcrest for the Council of Whitestone, a meeting of all the allied races of Krynn to determine a strategy for defeating the dragon armies. This council immediately breaks down as every group demands the Dragon Orb for itself. Seeing that the Fragile Alliance is about to be destroyed for good, Tasselhoff destroys the Dragon Orb, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. He is nearly killed on the spot by the furious elves, but then saved when Theros, Laurana, and the others arrive at last, bringing with them the newly forged Dragonlances. Sturm, Laurana, Tasselhoff, and Flint travel to the High Clerist's Tower, the ancient stronghold of the Knights of Selamnia. The tower guards the pass to the Vingarn Mountains, leading to the wealthy and strategically important city of Palanthas. Derek is placed in command of the tower with Sturm, now his bitter enemy, as junior lieutenant. Although the knights are there to protect the city of Palanthas, the Palanthians have made a separate peace with the dragon armies, rather than risk the destruction of their city. Trapped in the tower with no means of resupply, the troops begin to starve. The knights, most of them loyal to Derek, don't even bother to train with the Dragonlances. Only the younger, lower-ranked knights under Sturm are able to wield them with any competence. Meanwhile, Tanis and his companions have arrived at the port city of Flotsam on the shore of the Blood Sea of Istar. This is an actual port city, not a fake one like Tarsus. The companions are able to find passage on a ship called the Parashon, captained by a smuggler named Maquesta Carthon. Tanis is stunned to realize that the helmsman of the Parashon is the same green gemstone man he thought had perished during the escape from Pax Tharkis. The man's name is Barum, and he is, for all intents and purposes, a mute. The city of Flotsam is under control of the same dragon High Lord who destroyed Tarsus, so Tanis steals the armor of a dragon army officer in order to travel around the city. While in disguise, he is attacked, only to be saved by the dragon High Lord, who mistakes Tanis for a real dragon army officer. Without any way to contact his friends, Tanis is forced to enter the dragon High Lord's service. Back at the High Clerist's tower, the knights have become desperate. Seeing no other way and enticed by dreams of glory, Derek Crowngard leads the majority of the knights in a preemptive attack against the dragon armies blockading the tower. Derek and his army are massacred, and Derek's severed head is returned to the remaining knights as a grisly warning. Now only Sturm and the inexperienced young knights under his command remain to defend the tower. As they await the final attack, Tasselhoff makes a startling discovery. Deep within the inner sanctum of the High Clerist's tower, he finds another Dragon Orb. Laurana devises a plan. She will use the power of the Dragon Orb to lure the dragons close enough to the tower that the knights can use the Dragonlances to slaughter them. Laurana isn't a magic user and shouldn't be able to control the orb, but there is no other alternative. It's death by Dragon Orb or death by dragon. Sturm takes it upon himself to buy Laurana some time by creating a diversion. He knows it will mean his death, but he is willing to sacrifice his life in service of the knighthood and in defense of the innocent. He travels to the top of the tower where he challenges the Dragon High Lord to face him one-on-one. The Dragon Lord, riding a lightning-breathing blue dragon named Sky, accepts Sturm's challenge. At last, it is revealed that this Dragon High Lord, the same one who sacked Tarsus and who saved Tanis and Flotsam, is none other than Kitiara Uthmatar herself. Kitiara kills Sturm, but his plan succeeds. With the assistance of the Dragon Orb and the Dragonlances, the knights are able to fight back against the evil dragons. Laurana confronts Kitiara, who mocks her, telling her that Tanis is with her as her second-in-command and her lover. Angered, Laurana manages to wound Kitiara's dragon before the dragon armies retreat. Sturm is buried with full honors in the High Clerist's tower, holding his father's sword and wearing the star jewel given to him by Alhana Starbreeze. So that is Dragons of Winter Night. There's a lot to unpack, so I'm going to start by giving my review of the novel, citing what I like and don't like about the book. I should say right off the bat that this is my favorite novel in the trilogy and one of my favorite novels of the series, so I don't have much bad to say about it. My favorite thing about the book is, as with Dragons of Autumn Twilight, the complex and relatable characters. Sturm, who is basically a secondary character in the previous novel, really leaps to the forefront of the story, proving himself to be more than just a bland, lawful good fighter. Likewise, Laurana develops quickly from the spoiled child she appears to be in the previous novel to become one of the most admirable characters of the series. We get to see a new side of Raistlin as he embraces his inner darkness, even if only temporarily, during the battle through Sylvanesti. The romance between Sturm and Alhana Starbreeze is truly touching, if tragically brief, while the romance between Gilthanas and Silvara is heartbreaking. Gilthanas loves Silvara, but he just can't accept her. On the brighter side, it's hard not to enjoy the scene where Flint thinks he's dying of seasickness and gives a melodramatic deathbed speech to an eye-rolling Tasselhoff. The friendship between Tass and the wacky wizard Fizzband during their visit to Mount Nevermind is a treat as well. Even the villains in this novel are more developed. Derek Crowngard isn't evil, but he's inflexible, spiteful, and ambitious, and his pride nearly costs the knights everything. Kitiara, unlike Verminard, is a nuanced character with her own personality and motivations beyond just killing for its own sake. It's been literally decades since I first read the novel, so the impact of the reveal of Kitiara as the Dragon High Lord is obviously diminished, but I do remember being stunned by that twist as a kid. The story of Winter Night is quite a step up from Autumn Twilight. The first novel feels like a series of episodes, with the characters moving from one set piece to another. They fight some monsters, then move on. The story in the second novel flows organically as the companions search the continent for the mysterious dragon orbs. There's plenty of excitement and danger, but it truly feels like it's in service to the story. My favorite action sequence is definitely the nightmare in Sylvanesti. Reading along, you can feel the characters' growing sense of horror as they travel through the terrifying, corrupted forest. Their nightmares come to life before their eyes, and they watch their closest friends die. The authors even pull off a clever trick. We know this is a dream. Raceland says so right from the start, yet we don't really know what that means for the characters. Each death still hurts because we don't know if what happens in this dream is real or not. When it's all over, we know the characters have survived, but they have all experienced their own violent deaths, at least in their minds. At the climax of the novel, we are besieged in the High Clerist's Tower along with the companions. The tension feels genuinely unnerving as fear, jealousy, ambition, and hunger undermine discipline and the knights begin to unravel and turn on one another. We share their desperation, knowing that if this tower falls, the continent of Ansalon falls too. Sturm's death is one of the high points of the entire Dragonlance series, and his sacrifice will have profound implications for the knighthood and for the Dragonlance world for decades to come. The novel is not without its flaws, however. As you might have picked up from my not so subtle sarcasm, Tanis, Raceland, Caramon, Goldmoon, Riverwind, and Tika have almost nothing to do for the second half of the novel. Dragons of Winter Night definitely feels like the Sturm and Laurana show. It was probably a necessary plot device to split the companions into two groups, and it serves Tanis' story well, since he's now fallen back in love with Laurana before they're separated. But, as I said, it leaves a majority of our characters out in the cold. Did you notice that I didn't even mention what happens to Elistan? Do you even care? Of course not. No one does. The most frustrating thing about Dragons of Winter Night is that there appears to be two huge gaps in the story. First, there's the companion's quest to find the Hammer of Karas in the dwarven kingdom of Thorbarden. When the novel begins, they've already found it. It's as if there was an entirely separate adventure happening between Autumn Twilight and Winter Night. Likewise, the episode in Icewall is very rushed, and the only scene we fully experience is the discovery of the frozen good dragon. The confrontation with the dragon High Lord Fealthas happens completely off screen, as it were. Why did the authors exclude these two important subplots? Perhaps it would have made the novel too long or thrown off the pacing. I honestly don't know. Fortunately, these gaps were filled in during later stories and novels, which we will explore in due course. One of the strangest letdowns of the novel is the Dragonlance itself. Considering the entire series is named for this weapon, you would think it would play some major role. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely useful. The Knights of Selamnia wouldn't have been able to win the battle against Kidiara's dragon army without them. Still, the lances don't capture the imagination the way they probably should, since without a dragon orb to lure the dragons close, you can't hit a dragon in flight with a lance if you're standing on the ground. I know that the motivation behind the creation of the Dragonlance setting was to create a world where dragons would actively participate in events rather than just sitting on treasure somewhere, i.e., to put the dragons back into Dungeons and Dragons. My theory is that the Dragonlance was devised by the creators of the setting to somewhat level the playing field between puny player characters and their dragon foes. I can understand why this is a good idea within the game context, but it's never quite developed in the novels. So that's my critique of Dragons of Winter Night. Next, I'd like to move on to character profiles, to get up close and personal with two of our heroes, Laurana and Sternbrightblade. Laurana is one of my top 3 favorite characters in the Dragonlance series, so just bear in mind as we proceed. Laurana, whose full name is Loralantha Lassa Kanan, is the youngest child and only daughter of the Speaker of the Suns, the ruler of the Qualinesti Elves. She has 2 older brothers, the Crown Prince Porthios, a stern and serious warrior, and Gilthanas, a laid-back young elf who is both a skilled fighter and a novice magic user. She is raised in the elven capital of Qualinost, where she is protected and pampered. She is trained in combat, all elven girls are, but it's done out of a respect for tradition rather than in anticipation of any real necessity. As a child, the most important person in Laurana's life is Tanis, a half-elf who is raised in her household alongside her and Gilthanas. Tanis and Laurana fall in love, even going so far as to exchange the Dragonlance equivalent of promise rings. Predictably, when the secret romance is discovered, it causes quite the scandal. Tanis is driven out of Qualinesti, and Laurana is devastated. When Tanis returns to Qualinesti during the events of Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Laurana is thrilled, thinking he's come back to her. To Tanis, however, Laurana is little more than a child, and he's got a woman now, Kidiara. Laurana is devastated all over again. When the companions set out for Pax Tharkus, Laurana follows, seeking to prove her maturity and win back Tanis' love. Once she's found by the companions, they have no choice but to bring her along. During the rescue of the slaves from Pax Tharkus, and as the companions try to find a safe haven for the refugees, Laurana is exposed for the first time to war, starvation, disease, and death. She is forced to grow up quickly. She becomes the right-hand woman of the cleric Elistan, the leader of the refugees, and spends so much time working by his side that Tanis becomes jealous. Why Tanis thinks this beautiful young woman would be attracted to a boring old man isn't clear. When the companions are separated after the destruction of Tarsus, Laurana becomes the de facto leader of the second group, along with Sturm. The two form a natural partnership. Laurana still has love for Tanis. She's crushed when she sees him arm in arm with Kitiara during the Sylvanesti dream, but is nevertheless eager to find him once the Dragon Orb has been recovered. I can't help but wonder if Laurana might have been written differently today. Waiting for a man who seems incapable of making up his mind does not befit a strong, independent modern woman. If a man ever told me he couldn't choose me over another woman, I'd leave him in a heartbeat for a man who could. Laurana's most difficult moment comes when she is forced to commit treason against her own father by stealing back the Dragon Orb. I don't blame her, finders keepers after all. Laurana has come to realize that the elven obsession with isolation is destructive to the elves and to the world. During the siege of the High Clerist's Tower, Laurana fully comes into her own, devising a desperate plan to break the siege at the risk of her own life. When Laurana finds Sturm dead, slain by Kitiara, the pain of his loss nearly overwhelms her. But there's no time to mourn. With no one else to take command, Laurana finally becomes the warrior and leader she was always meant to be. Sternbrightblade is the last descendant of a noble family who have all served as knights of Selamnia for untold generations. As a child, the Brightblade family castle is beset by a mob who think the Brightblade family is hoarding provisions while the peasantry starve. This is untrue, but the mob refuses to believe it. Sturm and his mother Anna escape the castle and flee Selamnia, eventually settling down in the town of Solace. Sturm never sees his father again. Sturm's mother dies when he is young, but her stories of the Knights of Selamnia, and especially the legendary warrior Huma, inspire him to become the paragon of knightly ideals. He becomes friends with Caramon and later Tanis, Flint, and the others. Sturm, like most Knights of Selamnia, has an innate distrust of magic users in general, and the snide, sarcastic Raceland specifically. When the companions separate prior to the events of the novels, Sturm goes north to look for his father and obtain his knighthood. He returns without finding his father, but has managed to claim his father's armor and the family's most precious heirloom, an unbreakable sword called the Brightblade. He does not, however, claim his knighthood. Although Sturm allows the companions to think he has achieved knighthood during Dragon's Autumn Twilight, he never explicitly says it. Regardless, Sturm follows the oath of the Knights of Selamnia, as Solaris Oath Mythos, or My honor is my life, with scrupulous and unwavering devotion. Sturm's highest ambition is to one day redeem the honor of the Knights of Selamnia. He is willing to die to achieve this goal, imagining himself as a latter-day Huma. Yet as the events of Dragons of Winter Night unfold, Sturm comes to learn that evil and good are not as black and white concepts he once supposed them to be. He imagines the knighthood to be the symbol of all that is just and virtuous in the world, but the reality is that the knighthood is dominated by politics and legalism. He is able to find more honor and courage among his friends than among the knights. At the last moment of his life, when all hope seems gone, Sturm chooses to sacrifice himself to give his friends and the men he leads a chance to survive, not because of the knighthood's teachings, but because of his own personal honor. His final sacrifice unites the remaining knights, and the legend of his heroism begins to spread across Ansalon. In death, he achieves his life's goal. Raceland makes an observation about Sturm in a later novel, which I think deserves paraphrasing here. When Raceland later learns that Sturm was never truly a knight until the last weeks of his life, Raceland gains a new respect for him. He remarks that Sturm made an oath to himself alone. No one would have held him to it, and he would have lost nothing by breaking it. Yet he kept it steadfastly. As Raceland puts it, he knew himself. Before we finish things out, I'd like to take a few minutes to explore some of the cultures of the world of Dragonlance. First, the different nations and races of elves. In the early years of Krynn, the gods created living beings from the spirits which dwelt in the stars. The gods of good created the elves to bring order to the newly forged world. The first civilization of elves were called the Sylvanesti, whose mastery of the forest and of magic allowed them to create one of the most beautiful kingdoms the world has ever known. But the kingdom was not destined to remain unified forever. A civil war broke out among the elves, historically known as the Kinslayer Wars, with a rebel faction led by the prince, Kithcanen. Ultimately, the elves under Kithcanen left Sylvanesti to found their own kingdom, a kingdom which would come to be known as the Quellenesti. To this day, the bitterness following the Kinslayer Wars has yet to fade, and the Sylvanesti and Quellenesti remain mistrustful and hostile to their cousins. These are not the only elves on Krynn, however. Living in the wild forests, living close to nature rather than in towns and cities, are the Kaganesti, or wilder elves. The Kaganesti may be the first race of elves ever to exist on Krynn, but now they are seen as inferior and primitive by their more advanced of their kind. Upon arriving in Urgoth, the Sylvanesti and Quellenesti elves in exile enslaved the Kaganesti, seeing nothing wrong with mistreating those who they judged beneath them. There is a fourth race of elves, the Dragonesti, or Sea Elves, but we'll meet them in the next novel. I also want to address the race known as the Drow, or Dark Elves. Drow, as they exist in other campaign settings, do not exist on Krynn. That is to say, there are no dark-skinned, white-haired elves living underground on Ansalon. To be a dark elf in Dragonlance is to be, quite simply, an evil elf. To use the terminology of the elves, a dark elf is called dark because they have been cast from the light. For an elf to turn to evil is exceedingly rare, but it does happen. For example, the dragon High Lord Fealthas, from whom the companions take the Icewall Dragon Orb, is a black-robed elven magic user. To be declared a dark elf is to live in permanent exile from your home and your people. Lastly, we'll finish today with a look at the Shovaric Order of the Knights of Selamnia. Founded by the legendary hero Venus Lamnis, the knighthood was intended to be a force for righteousness and justice. The knighthood is divided into 3 ranks. The highest rank is Knight of the Rose, followed by Knight of the Sword, followed by Knight of the Crown. The greatest of all the knights is Huma, who, according to legend, rode a silver dragon and wielded the Dragonlance against the Queen of Darkness herself. For some knights in the modern era, Huma is the ideal all knights should aspire to. For others, he is simply a myth. Each knight is intended to follow a set of rules known as the Measure. The Measure guides the conduct of individual knights, as well as providing the structure of the knighthood itself. It is essentially the law code of the Solamnic Order. However, like any well-intentioned law code, there is always the danger that the letter of the law will become more important than its spirit as generations come and go. Perhaps to balance this tendency, all knights must take the capital O oath. The oath is very simple. My honor is my life, or, in the Solamnic language, est solaris oath mythos. This is the pledge that all knights make to put their honor before all other considerations, wealth, ambition, even life itself. Much changed in the centuries since the Cataclysm, however. Once revered as valiant champions of virtue, the knights became hated by the people of Ansalon. When the Cataclysm struck centuries before, the world was thrown into chaos, and the knights were unable to cope with the massive scale of the disaster. With no one else to blame for their suffering, the people blamed the knights. The knighthood persisted, but greatly diminished in strength and purpose. Hated by the world, the knights turned inward. With no vision for the future, they clung to the past. Ultimately, it was the sacrifice of Sternbrightblade that would remind the few remaining knights who survived the Battle of the High Claris Tower of their original purpose. And with that, we conclude our exploration into Dragons of Winter Night. I hope you've enjoyed the novel as much as I did, and I hope you've enjoyed examining it with me.